Hello everyone and welcome to the session of the Germ Eval 2020 Shared Task 1 on the classification and regression of cognitive and motivational style from text. The research field of natural language processing for the assessment of psychological text data is rather sparse. It often is closely connected to the medical application domain. Whilst this domain is impactful for human lives, data is hard to come by. Same goes for aptitude diagnostics. The most prominently researched applications are the prediction of Alzheimer's, depression detection, hate speech detection, the assessment of dream language, and the prediction of academic success. All those fields share some similar data sources, approaches, and findings, though. Thus, the work on this task could not only advance aptitude diagnostics, but also shed light on some medical issues as well. The task is motivated by current debates resulting from the validity of high school grades as a predictor of academic development and the use of IQ testing as a measure for intellectual ability, both being controversial. However, there are other psychometrics that have shown to be less biased, more gender neutral and fairer, whilst still showing high validity, stability, and reliability from an aptitude diagnostics point of view. Some of those are implicit motives, which aim to trigger subconscious desires rather than skill-oriented tests or direct questionnaires. Implicit psychometrics are those where participants are asked to interpret ambiguous images. An early example of this is the Rorschach test with the infamous ink dots. Downsides of those promising and fair psychometrics are that the manual labeling process is very costly and that the underlying patterns ought to be researched further. As many of you from the audience probably noticed, there was a righteous but rather heated debate of this task regarding its ethical implications. Even though there is a dedicated NLP and society session on the Swiss Text and Convent's main conference, which we strongly recommend, we want to at least give a statement at this point. We agree and are well aware that there is the danger of socioeconomic biases in NLP research. We also agree that the first call had poor wording and lacked important background information as well as a necessary ethical statement. However, the main reason for the heated debate arose from a misconception of what the task was really about. That is, basic research on the possibility to predict psychological traits by text with a focus on implicit motives and not IQ. The IQ was just one of the provided other metrics amongst a few due to the fact that it is being utilized in aptitude diagnostics, especially in Germany. But that is not what the task and our research is about, but implicit psychometrics. For Subtask 1, the shared task participants were asked to recreate a ranking of students which was sorted by the sum of some aptitude diagnostic metrics, namely English, German, and math high school grades, as well as IQ scores. During training, participants could utilize provided text of an implicit psychometrics, the high school grades, and IQ scores. For the test phase, the only available information were the text of an implicit psychometric. This type of task has never been solved. For Subtask 2, the shared task participants were asked to classify texts of an implicit psychometrics into one of 4 motive classes or, depending on the approach, one of 6 level classes, resulting in up to 30 target classes. Therefore, from a technical perspective, the Subtask 1 is a regression task recreating a ranking with only text from an implicit psychometric, and Subtask 2 is a classification task. The data for the task 1 was provided by the Nordakademie, and the data for the Subtask 2 was provided by the University of Trier. For Subtask 1, almost 2,600 students uttered more than 77,000 unique implicit psychometric texts. Those consisted of 3 to 42 and on average only of 15 words, making this a short text task. The more than 200,000 hand-labeled implicit psychometric texts for Subtask 2 were authored by 14,600 participants, making this one of the largest manual labeled psychometric corpuses. Those, as well, were short text with 4 to 79 words per answer and 22 words on average. Participants of the shared task were provided with 3 different files linked by a unique student ID. Firstly, a file with an image number, an answer number, a unique ID, and an implicit psychometric text. Another file contained the student ID and rank, and a third file contained the metrics of high school grades and IQ scores, all set standardized and anonymized. For the test phase, participants only were provided with the first file information. The data for the second subtask was provided with the first file containing a unique ID, a motive level, as well as a level label, and a second file containing the corresponding unique ID and an implicit psychometric text. Participants of the shared task had to handle imbalanced data and had the choice of either targeting all 30 classes at once or a combination of multiple classifier systems. The provided baseline systems for both tasks utilized term frequency inverse document frequency, or TF-IDF in short, for representing the texts as statistical features, and both systems utilize support vector machines approaches. For this first task, a support vector regressor, and for the second task, a support vector classifier with a little pre-processing and tuning for both tasks were utilized. Now to the very exciting part of this shared task, the placements of the participants. The evaluation metric for the first subtask was the Pearson ranking correlation coefficient. The baseline with TF-IDF representation and a support vector regressor reached a correlation coefficient of 0.19. The second team from the FH Dortmund reached 0.32 with a similar approach, and the team from Tübingen scored the highest with a linear system and 0.37. Since such a task was not solved before, this high value suggests that there is indeed a signal in the textual data. The second subtask is divided into the 3 different ways of looking at the labels, as motive labels and level labels are independent by definition. The evaluation metric for all of those was the macro F1 score. The baseline for motives only is about 65%. Tübingen scored with their SVM adaptive approach 68%, and the second place was achieved by Team IDIAB and their simpletrans out BERT system and a score of 70. And the highest score came from the Team FH Dortmund with the DB MDZ uncased and a score of 70.5. The baseline for the levels only approach is about 60%. The rest is quite similar to the motives only goal. Tübingen scored with their linear approach 63%. The second place was achieved by Team IDIAB and a score of 65. And the highest score came from the Team FH Dortmund and a score of 66.5. Following the other 2 goals, the last one with as many as 30 target classes in the combination of levels and motives came with a baseline of roughly 64%. Team Tübingen surpassed that with their SVM adaptive and a score of 68. IDIA placed second with a score of 70, and the team from the FH Dortmund reached roughly 17.5 on the 30 target classes. Thus, classification of the motives and levels not only is possible, but reaches human-like performance, even with a novel so-called freedom motive, which has not been researched yet. As for today's agenda, we will now hear the different systems, first from the IDIAB, followed by the team from the FH Dortmund, and lastly from the Tübingen team. Later this afternoon, we will hear and see the other Eval shared tasks. Lastly, we want to strongly recommend the NLP plus Society session tomorrow from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m., which will discuss the ethical considerations and implications of this very task in much more detail with sophisticated experts from the linguistical domain, from psychology, from Aptitude Diagnostics, and the field of AI ethics. Please consider joining this very important and necessary discussion. If there are any further questions, comments, impressions, or ideas, we are very happy to take those. Thank you very much.